Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Easy Conversations, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dania. In this week's episode, I sit down with Alexander Cottle, who is the founder of the Unmasked Man. In this episode, Alexander shares his own story about what brought him to finding self-love and changing his ways after experiencing a stroke at the age of 27. Alexander also shares some insight around the different archetypes that men can take on and how to find balance. I really hope you can get a lot out of this episode, and if at the end you could leave a review, I would truly appreciate it. All right. Well, Alexander, thanks for joining the podcast. I appreciate you coming on, taking the time, and super grateful, that you were able to do this. And I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have. I think, I love the content you put out there, and I love your energy. So I'm hoping the listeners can get the same. So definitely excited.
Thank you for inviting me on. Absolutely honored to be here, brother, and very excited to have a chat with you today.
Yeah. And so before we get into it, I wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to talk about, kind of introduce yourself and some of the work you're doing. And I know you're kind of the face behind the Unmasked Man. So maybe explain what that means. And, I've got some questions for you, so we'll get into that. But yeah.
Yeah. So my spiritual journey or transformation started 7 years ago. It started from a wound. I was a man in the hamster wheel, working very, very intensely. Had the job ticked in the box, had the financial security ticked in the box, the girlfriend. Thought I had it all kind of made. I was 27 at the time. I was going where society told me I needed to go, and I got burnt out. I ended up a culmination of too many drugs, too much alcohol, too much pressure, too much stress, too much taken on at an early age, and I ended up in the States in Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and I had a stroke, which was very, very young age to have that, but the body keeps the score and it tells you where or when to stop. And from there, I suffered with, I went down the dark night of the soul, my own mental health journey, depression, suicide. And so because of my connection with that wound as a man, I started the Unmasked Man as a consequence. And to me, when I was thinking about names and coming up with a concept that was so much bigger than just my journey and could actually signify the journey of so many other men, it was, what do I find myself doing when I'm around men? Well, I end up wearing masks. I actually end up wearing masks in a lot of situations, or did, should I say. I don't so much now, or I hope I don't, at least. But I ended up not being authentic, not being me, and not knowing how to communicate with other men. And the Unmasked Man came about to really unmask this bullshit persona that we can sometimes put on, how we relate to each other, and to really strip back these, the sarcastic man, the toxic man, the I don't feel my emotions man, let's just strip it all back. Let's get to the core. Let's be human. Let's be honest, let's be authentic, and let's meet another brother, another man in a space of connection, of truth, of vulnerability, of courage. And, I will share my wounds, you share yours, and let's openly talk about what it is to feel and what we struggle with as men.
No, and I think that's, a lot of great points you touched on there. And I appreciate you sharing your own kind of what brought you to this space, and we all kind of have that defining moment. And I can resonate with that because I was kind of in the same boat, checking all the boxes, basically what society tells you to do. And then at one point you don't feel real because, to your point, you're wearing a mask. And I mean, to extend that, I feel like you know, I I would wear a mask around everyone, not only just around men. It was family, friends, partners, anyone, regardless of gender. And I think some of the things you've touched on, getting down to the core, is important in order to be um, just in alignment with ourselves, but also being authentic with everyone else.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know how to live unauthentically anymore. My body, my nervous system doesn't let me do it. I
Yeah.
even if I wanted to go back that way, or to lie, or to kind of dishonor, or cut my own boundaries off, or not give myself that self-respect,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't last long enough, because I know now how false it is, and how there's no foundation there. My foundations were built on sand, and I want to be as authentic and as vulnerable and as truthful as I can moving forward, so it can open up conversations with others to share their courage, to share their journeys, and to share their experiences, so we can all blossom and grow and support each other on this difficult journey called life.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. I appreciate that. And I think one of the things you mentioned, like when you had that incident in your life with the stroke, and you used the term "the body keeps the score," which I'm assuming you're referencing the book.
Yeah, a little
But
bit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it like to be in that space where you think you're doing all the right things,
Mm.
and then all of a sudden one day waking up that and realizing that clearly there's something that you're not doing in alignment with yourself. That's why your body is kind of rejecting something.
Yeah, it's frightening. It's frightening because I was overriding my own self. I wasn't listening. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't listening to my heart. I wasn't listening to my body. I wasn't listening to my needs.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't respecting my time. I was a yes man. I was a people pleaser. I wanted everyone to like me. And that gets intolerable. That gets it's so it's so suffocating. Not everyone is going to like me, and I can't say yes to everyone, otherwise I'll split myself into 1,000 pieces. And quite frankly, that's what I did, and I took on too much. And now I noticed that pattern in me still. It's still there. It's a residue. It's something that can't just be shifted overnight. But I've thankfully learned so many tools now to bring in the holistic approach of self-care, of respecting my boundaries, of saying no, of getting used to hearing no from others as well,
Mm-hmm.
and to manage my body, my physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And I think I'm getting pretty good at it now. It feels good.
No, that's amazing. So I guess, and one of the challenges people have, like I think a lot of us struggle with it, is that whole notion of being able to say no, right?
Mm.
Because you almost feel obligated, or you don't want to hurt someone, or you don't want to damage a relationship. So for people that really struggle with that boundary setting, like what are some tools or tips you can share that have worked for you, and also being okay with just saying no, like just getting your head around that.
First and foremost, we need to understand our self-worth, because we are not going to be able to even say no if we don't realize that we have a no within us, that we are actually worthy of a different option. So it's building that self-worth. It's flexing that self-worth muscle, and realizing that we can say no. And then when we go around and about saying no to an individual, it's sitting with that uncomfortable energy that no creates, because the minute it leaves your mouth, and you might get a response from someone that's not used to hearing it, there is this, right, for me, and again I talk from my own experience, the people pleaser suddenly like, no, 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 I didn't mean to say that. It's like going off like a radar in my head,
Mm-hmm.
and actually I want to kind of pull back my no and say yes. And I'm so getting comfortable with sitting in the uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
um, and spending time, I think, away from society alone. Spending, I know that doesn't directly answer the question into saying no, but the more we can spend time with ourselves, the more that we can kind of go away for a weekend by ourselves, go on a holiday, read a book, like get used to spending time with ourselves. We realize that we have needs, that we can look after ourselves, that we are not them being codependent, but being interdependent, and we can actually then have the courage to build and flex that muscle of setting stronger boundaries and creating time for us, not time for everyone else.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that you mentioned in there that I want to just highlight a little bit further. So, starting with what you said, being comfortable in the uncomfortable, and that's where the most growth happens, when we are making ourselves comfortable in the unknown, or just stepping outside of our comfort zone. That is when we grow, right? And then the other thing you talked about is finding that solitude and being comfortable with that as well. And I think a lot of us struggle because we don't want to be alone. We don't want to be alone with our thoughts. We don't want to be alone just for the sake of being alone. But I think that's, again, where a lot of, for me personally, growth happens, is when I'm alone, whether it's reading a book or just challenging myself with my thoughts. But it's okay to take that space for yourself, because otherwise you're almost avoiding whatever you're trying to escape from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And especially with today's availability with technology, at the drop of a hat, we are able to access the entire world and access so many different channels of communication. So limiting ourselves to step back and cut away from that and withdraw even more into ourselves and really have that solitude is very, very difficult. But once we are there, and once again we sit with that uncomfortableness, which is and can be torment at first, but the more we get used to it, the more we sit with uncomfortable emotions. Let's take anxiety, for instance. I myself suffered with anxiety for years, and thankfully I met the right teachers to encourage me to sit with it. And once you see anxiety through an experience of which it hits a crescendo, and you don't come in with a compulsion, you don't look for that solitude, and you actually really allow the anxiety to be felt and reach its maximum, then the next time that you experience the anxiety that's triggered from the same incident, it can't reach the same peak that it reached before. And so if we continually sit with that, let's take a phobia, for instance, like a spider. If you sit with a paper spider, and then you sit with a plastic spider, and you sit with a real spider, if you gradually train yourself to deal with the uncomfortableness, eventually you can move through it until you're just sat there with the real spider and the real thing on you. And people might be going, I could never do that in a million years. But phobias are not created from birth, and that is the same for all the other emotions that we're feeling, the traumas that we feel. If we can go back, if we can feel it to heal it, and we can transcend it and get used to it, then we can find that solitude that we're looking for.
Yeah. And I think even in that example you gave, in psychology, they call it exposure therapy, or even shaping, right? Like you kind of shape yourself to deal with it. And I mean, another analogy is like, even when you stretch or you're doing yoga, you often get into poses where you feel the pain.
Yep.
And you could either run from it and be like, okay, I can't do this pose, or you breathe through it, right? And that's kind of how I look at even anxiety or phobias, where it's like, okay, it is painful or uncomfortable, but you got to just breathe through it, and then, kind of stretch yourself a little bit, right? So
absolutely. And in those moments, just like we're in the yoga class, it's like, right, let's come back to the senses. Let's come back to the sounds in the room, the smell, the sight, maybe an object, a colorful object, or, using those sensory organs to basically pull you back into the present, so you can watch the anxiety as something moving through you, not actually something that is you.
No, for sure. And I guess another thing I wanted to tap into was, you mentioned the whole personas, and that's something you talk about quite a bit, even on your page. Do you mind like sharing a little bit like the different personas, how they show up, and how we can as men specifically be mindful of these personas?
Do you mean the archetypes?
Sorry, the archetypes. Yeah.
The archetypes. Yeah. So, um, as as I got into men's work, a huge book that represents a lot of men's work is Robert Moore's King, Warrior, Lover, Magician, and for me they resonated. Not everybody resonates with the archetypes. Some people find their own way through working, especially with the shadow. But for me, they give a roadmap. They're a compass. They literally, I feel like I embody it now, and I'm like, I go this way or I go that way. So not in accordance with Robert Moore's model, but similar models that the king sits in the north, the lover sits in the east, the warrior sits in the south, and the magician sits in the west. So if you're sat at the center of these four archetypes, each house within them a triangular formation where you have at the top of the triangle, that archetype in its fullness. And then at the two lower corners, as the triangle spreads out, you have the two bipolar shadow parts of that archetype, of which a man fluctuates in most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So once we can start to identify our shadow, and shadow, what do I mean by shadow? I mean all of the things that the subconscious mind has suppressed. So, anger, jealousy, envy, like taking pleasure in one's pain, and all these things that we say they're not there, and they are within all of us, right? In some degree, we can start to identify the patterns in which we're acting out with other people in our life and self-sabotaging our own self. So for instance, let's take the king archetype, which kind of rules over the kingdom of the lover, the warrior, and the magician. You have a king in his fullness. And what does a king in his fullness look like? He is a man that is welcoming. He allows everyone to sit at his table. Think King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table. He is not higher than another man. Every man is equal.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to welcome other men into his kingdom. He knows when to ask for counsel. He won't just lead the way and become the tyrant and not listen to his people. And this goes for the same way that we approach our mind. Like, we don't want to push these negative thoughts away. We want to bring all these emotions into consciousness and witness them and allow them all to be present within us, so we don't have to suffer by fighting them anymore. And the two bipolar shadow parts of the king that play out are the tyrant on one hand, which is the active shadow, and then on the passive shadow is the weakling prince, or the abdicated king. So what do those two things mean? Well, we all kind of know what a tyrant is. A tyrant is a bully. He has got narcissistic energy in him. He wants to put another man down, and he wants to control, manipulate, and take power and dominate. And if I said all those things, we could probably see some of them moving inside of us, maybe, but we just don't like to admit it. So this is what exploring the shadow is all about. And then if we go over to the abdicated king, or the weakling prince, well, what is he? He is the man that doesn't even want to try. He is the man that lets the tyrant dominate him. He's the man that just wants to give up and, is the martyr and feels sorry for himself. And again, we can all probably relate in some capacity to that energy as well. So once we know that we have this active shadow and we have this passive shadow in us, and they fluctuate from one bipolar part to the other, we can see them playing out. And it's like, oh, I'm being the weakling again here, or I'm being the tyrant, I'm being over dominating of a situation or a scenario. Right, let me come back to my king in his fullness. And how do I do that? Well, I come back to my heart, I come back to my consciousness, and I see these two parts of myself which have just inherited wounds, and also they're kind of ancestral and societal wounds that have carried along throughout generation to generation. And I can see them play out, and I can go, I don't want to act like that anymore. So I come to the top of the triangle, the top of the pyramid, and I come back to my king in his fullness. And my king in my fullness says, right, I see you both playing out, and I accept you both, but I'm not gonna buy into that story anymore. And so that's one of four archetypes explained. And then you've got the different ones. So the lover is the addict or the impotent lover. The warrior is the sadist or the masochist, right? So the man that is the bully or the coward, yeah. And then the magician is the detached manipulator or the denying innocent one. So here's the powerful shaman that uses his spiritual energy to manipulate others, or he is the kind of person that plays dumb and doesn't actually want to show up, and is just he doesn't want to be there for himself. And the four energies all cross over. So Robert Moore does a great line where he talks about the king, if the warrior doesn't have the king to follow, then he becomes a mercenary. And it's just like you see suddenly how they all switch over. So if the king isn't at his center within our own castle, then the warrior just can cause havoc and chaos in our life. And it's a beautiful analogy. It can really resonate with a man, I think, because it's based on Carl Jung's work, and he believed that this mythology lives within our very subconscious. So we watch modern day superhero movies now, which were the equivalent of Greek story tales, and we can resonate, and we love that good meets evil, and we can see these characters of magician and king and warrior and all play out. So it's a fascinating mix, and one that I really feel helps men on their path.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you breaking it down, and it sounds really fascinating to the point where I'm inspired to now look into this. It's really cool. And I guess when you talk about the superhero movies, one of the things like I've been trying to point out to even my son is like, it's interesting depending on what angle you look at the movies from, but you see the inner struggle the superheroes all encounter, and you see that character development and how they're able to finally get to the point where they acknowledge their own tendencies, like you said, where you kind of move from the shadows. And when they finally accept that they have these shadows is when they're able to counter it best and finally achieve that, the storybook ending.
Absolutely. No one got enlightened envisaging figures of white light, right? Again, Carl Jung. It's like every superhero, let's take Star Wars, for instance. You need to understand the dark side and know it's there for you to kind of transcend it and become a Jedi. And it's like, this is beautiful. Like you're so right. In so many movies, it's at that point where he almost realizes his own immortality as well, and the destruction that he could cause with his own power, that he chooses not to go down that path. And yeah, I think a man can resonate with that so much.
For sure. And I guess going back to the archetypes you spelled out, and one of the things I wanted to understand a little bit more is, we all experience a bit of all the archetypes, and how do you kind of find the right balance?
Yeah. So I think, say for instance, like going back to the king, the tyrant king, or the weakling prince, there will be one that resonates with you more, but you will also have a little bit of the other. And we're doing the warrior right now this week in our men's training, and so we have the sadist, and the sadist is the man that enjoys causing pain to others, right? So he is the man that bosses people around and really dominates and inflicts this insulting barrage of abuse on others and loves it. And he is also the workaholic in the office that just drives over his own body and his emotions. And the bipolar part to that shadow is the masochist, who is the doormat. He allows people to walk over him, and he is the man in the office that just says yes to everyone. So you have the masochist one day getting his boundaries crossed and exploding after years and years of denying his own emotions. And what does he do? He goes straight back to the sadist again. He becomes the sadist. So we are always kind of fluctuating in between these parts. And of course, one side of the pendulum then suddenly swings the other way. And we see this playing out. So in answer to your question, yes, we are all of them in all different flavors in all at different times, fluctuating from minute to minute, second to second, depending on how aware of our shadows we are.
Right. And I guess for people that do struggle with that, because I think, when you're not mindful, like, and if I were to kind of relate it back to myself, I've been in those situations where I'm like you said, swinging back and forth. And
Mm,
it's just so toxic because you're just trying to find or ground yourself, but you don't know how.
mm,
um and like you said, you feel like everyone's taking advantage of you, you're a doormat, so you respond by just overcompensating. um and I think you touched on, even with yourself, just setting healthy boundaries, being comfortable with saying no. Are there other things like people can do to find that balance within themselves? Like, what are some things they can do? And I know you've talked about mindfulness, but is that kind of what helped you in that space?
yeah. What else can people do? For me, meditation and mindfulness has been key because I've been able to observe everything. From the place of the witness, you can start to see all of the shadow parts where you are self-sabotaging, where you are allowing energy leakages to come out. Um, then we go back to the body and the physicality. Well, obviously, if we're sleeping right, if we're eating right, and we're looking after ourselves in the right way, then we're going to be more present and show up. And all of those things are a consequence of how much we love ourselves and how much we really care for this vehicle, right, that we're driving around in. And that's hard to train yourself to look after this vehicle in our young teens and 20s. The body kind of like looks after itself, but even now at 34, I'm starting to notice like certain things that are slowing down, and I'm like, oh shit, I really got to look after this beautiful thing that has held me all this time. And so yeah, I think breaking it all down from the physical to the mental and cognitive, and then the spiritual. And everyone is different, so different things will resonate for different people. Some people will be able to sit and meditate, other people will have to do active meditation. Some people will find their meditation through sport or
Mm-hmm.
through exercise. Other people will find their way through meditation or psychedelics, plant medicines. These openings that you can have through ceremonial aspects as well. um, it's not kind of a one size fits all. It's whatever resonates with you, depending, I think, on your dosha, if we're working with the Ayurvedic system, or the chakra system in yoga,
Mm-hmm.
or different elements, if we're working with the more like a Chinese system. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that can be used.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another important thing you touched on is meditation can be in many different forms. It doesn't always have to be you sitting in a dark room with your eyes closed and just, how media or the movies make it look. It could be even while you're walking and you're meditating. And I think the key thing, and from my perspective, everyone's experience could be different, but from my perspective, it's finding stillness in your mind and not necessarily your body, right? It's finding that stillness in your mind where you can just pause and look at things. And like you said, understanding what are the negative energies that are coming in, or the toxic energy potentially. So finding that stillness in your mind and really reflecting on how can I find that balance, um, and live in alignment.
Yeah, and I would even say it's not even the stillness of the mind. The stillness of the mind is a subsequent uh, act that happens from wherever we are shining our awareness. And if our awareness is being shone onto the present moment, using the sound, or using the touch, or using the smell, so coming back to the now, you know, then as a byproduct of that, the mind goes whew, and then the silence is felt. Do you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? So
Yes.
instead of like trying to force the mind to be quiet, which a lot of people get, they trip up when they first start meditating. They think, I've got to stop thinking. Well, yeah, that's hard. Don't think of a pink elephant, boom, pink elephant comes up in
Yeah.
the mind. So it's like actually shining our consciousness on the present reduces, in yoga we'd call it vasanas or samskaras, these habitual patterns of the mind. Yeah, it slows them down, and
Mm-hmm.
gradually you come into an awareness that maybe you're not used to, because you're not used to living at that kind of mindful
Mm-hmm.
life, and it feels amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think again, like you said, like for people that are starting out with meditation, it is hard because your mind is racing and you're not used to that, just sitting or just sitting, being in that place of just finding that stillness. So thoughts will come. And even like, I don't meditate as much as I would like, but over time you do get better at processing thoughts, and they still keep coming, but it's letting them pass and accepting them for what they are, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not feeling bad that, oh, I'm just thinking about things now, I can't meditate. It's sticking with it, right? And processing those thoughts.
Yeah, and the deeper you go into meditation, the more you're going to unearth as well. And that, can sound scary at first, but actually it's really quite beautiful. Like I remember meditating quite deeply last year, and there was a moment where I really like got a strong, not a voice in my head, but a strong vasana, like of old, that was very negative. It was a deep one, and it said, "I hate you." It was this thought, like, I hate you, and it always touched the surface layer. It always been around, but I started to get to the core of it, and once I started to realize that there was a part of me that hated myself, then I can bring it into the light, and I can really transcend it. And I knew it was always there, but I was maybe, like I say, not touching the root. And the deeper you go, you can start to really de-weed your garden, and
Mm-hmm.
and see the core of this wound, of this lack of self-love, or lack of trust, or lack of belief in yourself. And you can transcend these limiting beliefs, and you can change your life quite simply. And that will be your body will change as a consequence. It will be the catalyst to change your body as well, because we are living organisms, and every cell in our body is alive and responds to our awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's, yeah, and I think that's important to touch on, that this whole idea of the hate that comes in, whether it's a thought or through our actions. And I think a lot of us experience it because we tend to do things that are harmful to us, whether it's our minds or even our bodies. Do you mind touching on that a little bit more in terms of, when you started getting to the root, what were some of the things you were able to find and kind of navigate through it?
um I think for me it was like addiction, self-worth. um like I would sabotage. I had strong um uh, energies about I wasn't worthy of receiving. So when we say receiving, we think, oh, like maybe that's money. Well, yeah, that's one thing. That's how it will show up in your life. But actually, receiving everything, from receiving a gift off a friend, receiving pleasure from your lover. Like, if you can't receive, then you're gonna close off the availability of abundance in your life, which is everywhere. So you're going to see your life through these spectacles of, like, I'm not worthy. And that, of course, is coming from this lack of self-love, this lack of self-respect. So as I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, I started to see, like, it was almost like a cancer in every area, in every thought process, in every byproduct of my life. And the more I could de-weed and pull out, it wasn't just, oh, let's look at money issues, or let's look at sex issues, or let's look at receiving a compliment. It was like, let's look at all of this as a big, broader scale. And how do I do that? I do that through spending time with myself. And again, coming back to what we said earlier, like loving myself, taking that time, the same way that I would treat my best friend or my partner, treating my body or myself like that. And it's a muscle, and it's hard, and you have to flex it every day. And I go I go and run a bath now, and I'm like, instead of just running a bath, I'm like, I'm worthy of bubble bath. I'm worthy of a candle or a like some incense, right? Because I'd do that for my girlfriend if I was going to run her a bath. But for me, I'd be like, oh, I'll just put some water in, and like these little examples are quite funny. Same with like dinner that I cook. If I was to cook a meal for a friend, they'd come over, I'd cook them a beautiful meal, and if it was me, I'd just throw some toast on, and off I go. And it's like, no, slowing it down, looking after myself, being kind and respecting. And yeah, it's a long, hard process, and one I'm still learning, as I'm sure you are, but it can and will change your life.
Yeah, no, I that was amazing how you explained it, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's important because we all kind of struggle with it in different ways, and like you said, it is a lot of hard work, but it's needed, right? You can choose to stay where you are and just like you said, your body keeps the score. It's going to show up, or you can do the hard work, and like you said, it's like going to the gym and doing weights. You're not going to see the results right away, but over time you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even how far that I've come, like I felt like I knew so much arriving back in England last March, after I was out in Thailand for 2 years. I was really enjoying my life out there. I was around a spiritual community, lived in my flip-flops, was coaching people around the world. I thought I got it made. It was like all gravy. And then kept coming back and having to face the uncertainty of the last year, as we all have, the struggles, the closing down of the human emotional heart that there's a lot of fear currently around, and to not allow that to enter your nervous system is a minefield, and you really have to keep your energy higher than ever right now to protect yourself. And it's been a huge learning curve. So whenever you think you are or you've got to a stage where you're like, I'm pretty good, I know quite a lot, and it's like, nope, I'm just going to throw a huge bag of new idea. I had last year I had an eye injury from a surf accident, which I nearly went blind, and that taught me so much about internally seeing even more through meditation, and not looking through my actual eyes, and seeing the world from a whole perspective. So I think life just always brings you these challenges and these obstacles, and it's how we respond to them, right? It's how we can use our tools from our toolbox to get through and to stay lighter and not let ourselves go into a spiral.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think recognizing that you may not have all the tools at some point either, and I'm trying to understand how can you acquire those tools. And like for a lot of people, meditation is not a tool they have in their toolbox, so it's trying to figure it out and working through it, right? Whether even with yoga, not everyone's comfortable doing it, or being in that vulnerable space around other people. So again, like we covered, I feel like we've come full circle here, but that's where the most growth happens, is stepping out of that comfort zone.
Absolutely. And that's why I think, in relating this back to men's work, is like, as growing up, I found myself feeling more comfortable around women. And I got brought up by my sister and my mother. I would hang out with men in playing football or soccer, and then I would go home, and it would always be very light-hearted and not really, like, there wasn't a true connection there. And as I got older, I really craved a deep connection with men. And going into the uncomfortable of like asking a man, like, hey, do you want to go out like for a walk, is that's quite a big deal for guys. They're like, oh my god, like I can't ask another dude out. It's just like, and feeling the uncomfortableness that comes with that, and all the fears that come. I'm not homosexual, and all of this, and which is, it's absolutely fine if you are, but but it's such a deep fear in men to show affection, to show love for another man. I have a friend of mine that he still struggles to say I love you to another man. He says things like, you'll go well. You'll go far. You will, like, yeah, you're a good guy, and it's just like
Yeah.
these blockages, and we we crave and we need male connection as men. It's so important. We can't get everything we need from the female, the same
Hmm.
as the female can't get everything they need from the male. We
Hmm.
need to hang out, if you're a woman, with your sisters, and if you're a man, with your brothers. Like, you need that in your life, and you need to sit with the uncomfortableness of hanging out in those groups and what it triggers in you. And I always encourage very feminine men in my men's work to go and hang out with very masculine men, and
Hmm.
encourage very masculine men to go and hang out with very feminine men, and see what that triggers in them, because it will bring up a whole load of shadow
Yeah.
that they weren't aware of.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, I mean, that's very important. And finding that brotherhood is also essential right now, where again, where men are trying to be more aware and feeling vulnerable. I think it comes with building that brotherhood and being comfortable with each other. So, I'm glad you shared that. And, we've got a connection here, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, for
it's
sure.
great.
I got a new friend the other side of the world. I love it.
Yeah,
It's good.
it's amazing. And again, I want to thank you for coming on here, sharing your story, sharing some of the work you're doing. It's amazing, and I love the energy you have. Like I said, it's really positive, it's contagious, and I can just feel it on my end too. So I know you're doing a lot of work in this space. So for people that want to find you or get a hold of you, what's the best way, through social media, through the group work you're doing? Like, what are some of the things people can do to find you?
So my main transformational website is Alexander Cottle. So Alexander and then COTTLE.com. And you can find all my offerings there, from retreats to circles to mixed circles, men's work, meditation, etc., and coaching. And then my big passion is a global wider project, which is uniting brothers all around the world, which is the Unmasked Man. And you can find us at www.theunmaskedman.co.uk. And yeah, just deeply passionate now about bringing men together and to shed the layers, shed the masks, and be seen in truth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've obviously, for you and I, we connected on Instagram, so you're also social media presence. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Alexander underscore Cottle is my main account, and then my Unmasked Man account is the.unmaskedman. Yeah, you can find me there.
Thanks. And any last words? Again, I know you shared a lot, but anything you want to get out there for all the brothers out there that are struggling right now, whether it's pandemic related or even with the pandemic, there's a lot of stuff that men are struggling with, whether it's putting food on the table, just being able to ask for help,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. Like, what would you like to say to our brothers out there?
I would say that you're not alone. That also to be kind to yourself during this period. Depression, 7 years on, is something that um, I believe will never go away. It comes back in little uh, sections or segments in my life still, but it's how I respond to them. It's the tools in the toolbox again, and it's facing them. And I always um, want men to understand that there's men out there that are changing the face of what it is to be a man, and that if they find the right group, they can really go on an absolutely incredible journey to discover themselves. And I just encourage them, if they're having this nervousness, to reach out or to approach or to explore, especially the spiritual side or the esoteric side, or that there's gold to be found there, and to make that jump, because yeah, it will change your life, I believe, for the better.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you again. I appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I have a new friend in Canada.
Yes. Well, that's the end of the episode. Thank you again for tuning in and showing your support. Until next week.